Welcome back, everybody. Haven't we had a wonderful day so far? Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? Yeah, I would agree with you. It probably is one of the days you would clap on. This is such a wonderful kind of forum for discussion and thinking and stimulating us to think. My name is Dan O'Neill. I'm a companion, first opinion vet and an epidemiologist at the Royal Veterinary College. And I think if you've had a nice lunch, I think we're now in for a lovely dessert because we've got some lovely offerings for you here. This session is called Animal Behaviour, Not Just a Problem. It's supported by World Horse Welfare, which is we're very grateful to. We've got four speakers. Marion Dawkins, first of all, Professor of Animal Behaviour at the University of Oxford Department of Biology. We've got Carrie Tooley, veterinary surgeon at Behaviour Referrals Veterinary Practice and also doing quite a bit of GP work. Nikki McLeod, consulting registered veterinary nurse, Alba Vet Dunfermline, and then Joe Hockenhull, head of research at the Donkey Sanctuary. This morning we spent quite a lot of time thinking about rights and then thinking about euthanasia. You could argue quite a paternalistic approach, hopefully benign paternalism. So we're now going to start thinking about behaviours and how to interpret them and what we can learn from those. We're going to start with a Slido poll. So I think Richard just put up a question. And you can vote yes or no or maybe. Often wonder if the maybes are where the real good stuff is, or is that just copying out? Not sure which. The question is, do you think you can tell when an animal is happy? Do you think, I guess the you is you personally, as opposed to a generic us as humans, do you think you can tell when an animal is happy? I think Peter Sandow is falling in love with you even more as an audience. As an ethicist, I think he likes answers that are neither yes nor no. And hopefully the maybes are because we're thinking about it and we're mulling things over. And hopefully at the end of this session we'll understand a little bit more about what those answers could be. So let's get started. We're going to start with Marion. And then each session is, as Marion comes across, each session is 8 minutes. And then at the end we're going to have 30 to 35 minutes of discussion overall. But we're just going to start with 4 chats of 8 minutes each. Yep, Marion, thank you very much.
When I saw the title of this session, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was absolutely extraordinary. Coming from a biological background, behaviour is to me absolutely essential to the survival of the animal. And then, of course, I realised that you were veterinary surgeons and you saw the bad side, the abnormal behaviour, the problems. So what I'd like to do really is to look at the other side of behaviour, the positive side. And behaviour, by behaviour we mean everything animals do, from a dog wagging its tail to a flock of starlings wheeling overhead. And it's an essential part of an animal's survival equipment. It can be observed. What animals feel cannot be observed. And the trick is to use one to look at the other. I'm going to look at 3 ways in which you can use behaviour to assess welfare. In assessing animal health, in showing us what animals want, and in interpreting their body language. I'll then end, if there's time, on saying how we can assess whether natural behaviour is essential for welfare. The first use of behaviour you probably already use. You use behaviour to diagnose animals with, for example, laminitis, an inability to turn or whatever, reluctance. But equally, of course, an animal that's running around in a very healthy way is demonstrating that all its systems are working. So clearly, behaviour is a very, very good indicator of physical health. But also, behaviour can indicate what animals want. And on the green side is positive, things that they do want. On the left side, things that they don't want, things that they try to get away from. And we can be objective about which side of the line the animals are. We wouldn't expect them, for good welfare, always to be on the right-hand side. None of us can be happy all the time, but on the whole, we expect, on average, that they would be on the right-hand side. And we can ask animals what they want using behaviour. Basically, will they use it, will they choose it, and will they work for it? If you're trying to advise a farmer whether a given environmental enrichment actually improves welfare, the first indication is, do the animals use it? If they don't, you can't hardly call it an enrichment. You can ask whether they will choose it. Do they like one food rather than another, one lighting condition rather than another? But above all, I think, you can ask whether they will work for it. Not just will they press a lever, but will they push a heavy door, like the chicken here, pushing a heavy weight to get at somewhere to dust bathe. The one I like best is the one in the middle, which is cows who will push a button to turn on a grooming brush, and they will push heavy weights to get to their grooming brushes. Very obviously, this is what they want. They like it. They choose it above even rubbing against trees outside. And these are some of the answers that animals have given. Mice want bedding material and tunnels. Calves want social contact. Mink will work hard for water to swim in. Chickens want to feed in bright light, but actually they prefer to rest in dim light. Cows, as we see, will work for access to rotating grooming brushes. Rats want to escape from CO2, which is actually quite harking back to discussion about euthanasia and humane death. Pigs want to escape from the smell of ammonia, even at low concentrations, which is actually, I think, quite interesting. Once we know what animals want, we can then begin to calibrate their body language. What do they do when they want to escape from something? What do they do when they want something or they have something that they like and want to repeat? Here we have an example. I hoped there was a sound, but there isn't. Anyway, it's a loud distress call in chicks, which is, yes, right. This is a loud distress call, and we call it a distress call. We know it's a distress call because they give it in situations which they try to get away from. It's penetrating, it's a signal to the mother to do something. And we also have various scales, a rat grimace scale, horse grimace scale, which indicates the body language of an animal when it is in pain. On the positive side, we can look at the expression, such as the expression on the cow's face, when it has something that it will work for. And again, I was hoping. Yes. Completely different sound. It's a so-called pleasure twitter that the chicks give when they've got everything they want, when they're warm, when they're well fed, and so on. So, and we know it's a pleasure twitter because the animal has told us that it gives it in situations that they themselves have chosen. So finally, I just want to say how you can use this idea of what animals want to answer questions like, is natural behaviour necessary for welfare? And I think there are two reasons why one can't assume automatically that it is. First of all, you can ask, does the natural behaviour improve health, and does the animal want to do it? In an unnatural environment, natural behaviour may have not very nice consequences. For example, most carnivores, when they hunt, they're unsuccessful. So a strategy of eating everything that you come across is advantageous because they never know when they're going to another meal. Put them in a domestic environment in which there's food all over the place, and of course you have a consequence. But of course natural behaviour may not be what animals want to do. Being caught by a predator is entirely natural, but not necessarily something animals will choose. So natural behaviour is a good starting point. It suggests candidates that you might look for to be good for welfare, but we need empirical evidence, either that it contributes to physical health or that the animals actually want to do it. So my conclusions are that behaviour contributes to welfare by providing information about physical health, about what animals want, and how to interpret their body language It's like a kind of Rosetta Stone telling you whether they regard it as positive or negative. And this approach allows an animal-centred answer to questions like, is natural behaviour necessary for welfare? Is play important for welfare? Does this or that enrichment improve welfare? And I think in order to add to the vet's voice, the owner's voice, we should add the animal's voice to our assessment of welfare. What does the animal itself want? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. It's wonderful. Now we're going to hear from Carrie.
Ideal, thank you very much. Fabulous, all right. So I'm going to talk about what goes into creating the behavioural responses that we see and we can observe. For me, this comes down to sort of breaking things down into very understandable chunks. There was a brilliant comment this morning about behavioural medicine not being taught uniformly and potentially not being taught well in a variety of vet schools. And I think that really makes it feel, when you've not had that logical approach to clinical problem solving taught within emotional health and within behavioural medicine, it makes it feel like that can of worms that was mentioned earlier. It can be really logical, and hopefully I'll be able to sort of shine a bit of a light on that logical approach in this next 8 minutes. So we have a stimulus. That can be anything that the animal perceives is happening around it. It might be an environmental stimulus, it might be a social stimulus. The animal has a perception of that stimulus. So that will be the experience that the animal's having internally. And what we then see is their behavioural response to that. So I'm going to break down a little bit what that perception, or what goes into that perception. So I work at Behavioural Referrals Veterinary Practice. Sarah Heath is our practice founder and head vet, and we use the Heath model, one aspect of which is the health triad. So we look at cognitive, emotional and physical input from that point of view. Cognitive includes cognitive health. So is this animal able to learn, able to remember towards the end of life? Is there cognitive decline? Has there been any congenital issues that lead to cognitive incompetence at all? What past learning has that animal had? So what's influenced their understanding of the world? And therefore, what are they anticipating when they're presented with this stimulus? Whether that's a completely novel stimulus like the greyhounds we were talking about earlier that just haven't ever really come across a washing machine before, or whether that's something they have had a previous experience with, like veterinary handling, that may not have been that pleasant for them. We come on to the physical aspect of things. So pain is one of the probably most relevant aspects of physical health that has an impact on behaviour. But we also know that gut health, skin health, there's this huge bi-directional interplay between emotional health and these other physical systems. So that's really relevant as well. And then emotional health. So I'm going to come into a little bit of detail. Again, within the Heath model, there is the sink analogy for understanding emotional arousal. So with this, we picture within each individual that we treat a bathroom sink, and that sink represents that individual's finite capacity for dealing with emotional arousal. The water going into the sink are the emotions that they're experiencing, and if we have a flood onto the bathroom floor, that animal is emotionally overwhelmed, and that's the most likely time we're going to see behavioural problems and behavioural responses. Engaging emotions are represented by the cold tap. So here we refer to Panksepp's affective systems, and the most common ones in our companion animals due to neutering are desire-seeking and social play. And that causes positive or engaging emotional arousal. And then we've got the protective emotional responses as well. So fear, anxiety, frustration. Panic grief is related to not having access to your caregiver. And pain has obviously both a physical component and an emotional component to it. Acute pain would be a hot tap situation. Chronic pain we describe as being like a residue that sits in the sink and takes up some of that animal's capacity for dealing with emotional arousal. And drainage. really important, regardless how big your sink is. So drainage is achieved by sleep, and adequate levels of sleep is something that we're doing some research into at the moment, trying to nail down how much sleep our different patients should be getting. But licking and chewing activities are often really common ways of lowering emotional arousal for most of our companion animals, and self-grooming for a huge number of species is really relevant for drainage too. And floods occur when there is excessive emotional arousal, and that can often lead to poor cognitive function. So I'm sure everyone in the room can probably think of a time when they were emotionally overwhelmed and possibly not making good choices and good decisions at that time. It also leads to increased HPA activation, and that then has knock-on acute and chronic physical health consequences. So you've probably heard people describe the stress poo that a dog might have after high arousal events, or we're all very familiar with stress cystitis cases. So that's really, really relevant from a point of view of emotional arousal having a direct impact on physical health in an acute way. When we think about chronic ways, we're thinking about long-term activation or increased activation of endogenous corticosteroids, and we're all aware of what goes on there. So thinking about behaviour, and I was asked to consider whether we think about behaviour early enough. So from the first contact with a new pet, we're thinking about the cognitive aspect of things. What sort of training is the caregiver doing with that pet? Loose lead walking is a classic example of things that people want to do with puppies really early doors. Is that being done in a way that's promoting good relationships between the pet and the caregiver? Are we doing that in a way that could potentially be seen as aversive? And if so, what's the knock-on impact later on in life? When we think about physical health, has that pet been taken on with itchy skin, with a gut issue, maybe parasites or other enteropathies that's going to have an impact on their emotional health, on the sleep that they're getting, as well as their physical development? And lastly, from an emotional point of view, we want to be really mindful about how much these new youngsters into the world just need to take time to observe new things. And if you actually if you're ever walking a pup and have the time to just let them or wait it out whilst they observe something new, it can be minutes, if not 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that they really want to just investigate a new thing for. And as long as they're in a good frame of mind, they're feeling optimistic and engaged with that, that's a brilliant thing to allow them to do to facilitate that socialization. Emotional health, sleep, hugely important. We think adult dogs probably 15 to 18 hours a day, pups 20 hours a day if at all possible. So we've got a huge number of sleep deprived pups, especially those taken on during COVID to entertain the household kids. That's a big problem. So yeah, sleep, super, super important. And then appropriate interactions between caregivers and their dogs, and any other species as well. So from the first contact that we have as veterinary surgeons with the new pet, I would encourage everyone to think about all three aspects of this health triad. So we naturally think about the physical health, and we would pick up the gut issues and the skin issues. But it is as important to think about and do a brief sort of consult on the cognitive aspect and on the emotional aspect as well. If all are adequate and optimal, brilliant, happy days. I still think it's worthwhile doing a little bit of education with the caregiver, because these pets don't come with a manual. Body language and behavioural responses is really useful to go through with them, and also discussing those appropriate interactions. But if there is anything that is suboptimal, assess that and treat it. And in particular with cognitive and emotional health, whilst that is suboptimal, protect that dog, or that cat. So, for example, dogs that are wary of other dogs on walks, it's not about exposure. It's about getting them into a good place and then not exposing them to another dog until they're able to cope with that. So protection is super, super important, along with that education. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Carrie. It's a wonderful framework with the triad format. And now we're going to hear from Nikki.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikki, and I'm a registered veterinary nurse. I'm also an Animal Behaviour and Training Council trustee, a British Veterinary Nursing Association council member, and a student at the University of Edinburgh studying clinical animal behaviour. But what's most important to me is being a registered veterinary nurse, and I'll explain why. I am also #vintage vet nurse. I have been at this for 24 years, and I have seen many changes over the years. As a student vet nurse all those many years ago, I was taught to scruff cats. I was taught to pin down dogs. Fortunately, in most recent years, we have seen schemes like the ISFM cat-friendly clinic scheme, Dogs Trust and BVBA's dog-friendly scheme, fear-free and low-stress handling. Yet I still continue to see dogs being manhandled, cats being dragged out of their carriers, and dogs being laughed at. If you've seen a recent social media post where the poor dog is so stressed during a nail clip that it bites the technician and the caregiver is laughing about it. Is that prioritising animal welfare in the veterinary setting? I don't think so. RVNs cannot diagnose. RVNs cannot prescribe unless directed by a veterinary professional, a veterinary surgeon. But what RVNs can do is that they can advocate for the animals that are in front of them. It pains me to see little change in the handling of pets by both some veterinary professionals and some of the general public, despite the schemes that I have mentioned. Carrie has already alluded to the health triad, where we talk about the interplay between the physical, cognitive, and the emotional aspects. There are behavioural specialists out there in the profession because animal disease is not just physical. It does have cognitive and emotional elements too. So if we know that behaviour is important, what can we do about it, especially for those in the audience that are also registered veterinary nurses? We can all think about being behaviourally aware. And regardless if you are a study geek like me that loves to learn, we can all learn to be behaviourally aware. The general public is included in that aspect as well. And as a registered veterinary nurse, there are many ways to be behaviourally aware, and unfortunately I've only got 8 minutes or I'd be here all day. So I'm going to pick a main topic, which is language. Body language, first of all. I've got 4 dogs here on the screen. Now I bet you'd all love to go up and give them all a tummy tickle. But out of those 4 dogs, there are 2 there that are actually very quietly saying to you, please don't touch my tummy. Whether there's 2 dogs up there that are actually saying, yeah, I'm cool, this is fine, you can come and tickle my tummy. But how many of us out there would still go up and tummy tickle on the 2 on the left? Body language is so important for everybody to learn, regardless of what you are in the profession or in the general public. But also the words that we use are just as important. So not only do we have to think about body language of the animal, we also have to think about our own language. Now, some people might say, hey, this cat, really cute, really curious. You're right, because he's mine. But how about this one, or this other cat? What's usually is said about these kind of cats? They're evil, they're spicy. Ooh, not fun. It's really one of my pet hates, and we see it all over vet nursing forums on social media, etc., about how funny it is to see spicy cats, etc. Think about if you said to a peer in practice that there's a spicy cat in the kennel, can you go and get it out? What emotional, what bias are they actually thinking about then when they're going to go and get that cat out? They've already now got preconceived ideas. How about if we turned around and said, could you go and get the cat out of kennel 4? He's actually in pain and he's actually feeling really sorry for himself. Immediately, your manner, your thoughts, your own emotions will completely change. And think about it, there is actually papers out there that do state that up to 80% of behavioural cases seen by specialists are actually having a pain component. So even if you're not a study geek like me, If you are an RVN or a veterinary professional, particularly the registered veterinary nurses, we should all be involved in behaviour assessment, because every single animal that we see shows behaviour, and it is so important. We can positively influence animal welfare. It's part of our job. I don't think any of us veterinary nurses in the room went into it for the money. I certainly didn't. Care should come before task, because at the end of the day, how many of us have seen emergency nail clips? Why can't we just turn around and say to the caregiver, let's go and speak to the vet about some pre-veterinary pharmaceuticals, let's give you some advice on what you can do to get that cat into the carrier, and let's come back and try this another time. It's quite a famous quote. You've probably all seen it. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. I have. In 24 years, I used to scruff cats. I used to pin dogs down. God gave me these for a reason. But at the end of the day, don't do it now, because I want to advocate for my animals. All animals deserve care and kindness. It is the job of the registered veterinary nurse to stand up and speak up, to advocate and educate, and to listen to the voice of the voiceless. If this vintage vet nurse, if this old dog can learn new tricks, surely everybody can, so don't use that as an excuse either. It's always been done like that? No, it should not now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And now our final fourth speaker is Jo.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to I can't even talk. It's a good start. AWF for inviting me to talk today. Hopefully, I'm going to start off with a video that works. Let's see. So how do we think this dog is feeling? You think it's happy? Right. So what do you reckon? Was that dog a happy dog? Not a happy dog? No, so this dog, this is Casey, 2-year-old Labrador. So she's actually belongs to a colleague who I work with, and the colleague is actually very concerned about her because she performs this very anxious behaviour when she's in the veterinary environment. And she sort of spoke to her vet and said that she really wants to work with Casey and trying to get her to relax in that environment. And the vet basically turned around and went, I can't see a problem. She's always wagging her tail. She's fine here. She's happy. And we've heard so far, yes, behaviour is an insight into how animals are feeling. We can learn a lot from an animal's body language and what they're doing, but sometimes we have to sort of look a bit beyond that too. So it isn't as simple as just like, oh yeah, that dog is walking, that dog is wagging, that dog is fine. Sometimes we need to think a bit more. We need to look at the context. We need to look at triggers. We need to understand species-specific behaviours. And so, yeah, just maybe when you're getting the hang of, okay, there's frameworks, there's things I can think about, I'm just going to make it a little bit more complicated again. So I guess the first thing, building on from what Nikki was saying, is about compliance. And there seems to be a great misconception that just an animal stands still and lets you do what you want to do to it. They're actually happy with that happening. And many aren't. And we've got an increasing body of physiological evidence that just because a behaviour, maybe the animal may just be standing still and you get on with something, for example, clipping horses, their physiology is actually relaxing like they're having a major stressor. And this hasn't just been found in mammals, this has also been increasingly studied in our exotic pets, including reptiles. And there was a recent study showing that a bearded dragon that was just happy happy sitting on someone when they're being handled, it's actually showing this stress response as a result of it. But how many of us think that? How many are just like, well, they're not overtly complaining, so they must actually be fine? We know that animals have different coping strategies. We know some flee, I can't even talk, some flee, some fight, and some freeze. And that is a coping strategy as well. And recognizing the difference between an animal that's freezing and an animal that is happy for you to go on and do what you're doing, or is okay with what you're doing, can take a bit of practice and a bit of educating yourselves in the signs for that particular animal. So I'm now working with donkeys. Donkeys are very well known for their very stoic behavior, but there are behavioral signs there. They're just so much more subtle than they would be for a horse. And just getting your eye in and thinking, well, it's a different type of animal. We shouldn't be looking for the same behavioral indicators we'd look for in horses within the donkey. And I think the other thing to appreciate is the influence of training. You can train an animal to stand there and put up with what you're doing to it. It doesn't mean they're happy with it. It doesn't mean that they're emotionally okay with what you're doing. And you can use things like overshadowing to help us when we're trying to work in this area, when we're trying to get on with an animal, make another stimulus sort of take salience over what we're trying to do. That still doesn't address the emotional component. Another thing, and I guess this sort of feeds on from what Nikki was saying about our spicy cats. Well, we have quite a lot of labelled aggressive animals. We have the lurching horse coming out the stable, the most terrifying looking rabbit I've ever seen in my life. It's blood dripping from its fangs. And we also have these donkeys. Now, these donkeys are actually playing, but they play in a bit more of a rougher way than our horses do. And at the Donkey Sanctuary, we actually get so many people phoning us up. My donkeys are fighting, I've separated them, it happens all the time. Again, it's understanding that species-specific behaviour. And as we've heard already, what is underlying the behaviour we're seeing? This fight reaction, essentially, what's behind it? Is the animal in pain? Is it a learnt response? Is it related to fear? Could it be territory, hormones, or is it actually misinterpreted play, over-arousal, frustration, self-preservation? There's so many different reasons that could be underlying this behaviour before we even get into the world of spicy cats or spicy rabbits. But, yeah. I just wanted to put some kind of victim animal underneath it, dripping with blood. Sorry, that's probably me getting a bit sick, sorry. All right. And then we've got the question we started with. So can we tell whether animals are happy? Are they content? Are they comfortable? Are they enjoying their lives? Well, again, we think we can, but is it actually as simple as that? I mean, it's always really nice to see when you get the videos of the cows being, I was about to do my cow impression, being let out of the fields for the first time after winter and having a bit of a buck and a bronc, or chickens dust bathing, horses engaging in mutual grooming. But when you start thinking of the context this is occurring in, that sort of raises a few other issues. So, yeah, these animals are happy, but are they happy because they're just exiting from some kind of period of deprivation? Those cows are happy because they've been denied grass and access to pasture. That chicken may have been denied access to dust. Horses, you see a lot of frustrated social grooming when they're actually reunited. It can be a rebound behaviour. It can also be a coping strategy. And if you look very carefully, there is differences in the nature of the behaviour you're seeing. It's not a slow, steady mutual agreement. It's like, help me, help me. But too often we miss that kind of subtlety because it's like, oh, look, they're being friends. Sometimes there's more to it than that. So it's thinking of that context, thinking of whether it's reflecting something else. So I guess this whole session really is just to start thinking about behaviour. What is the animal achieving by what it's doing? What is normal for the species, the breed, and even the individual? And this is where it really comes down to it, is knowing that individual animal. And this is where owners can be actually a very, very useful source of information for us. Looking at the context, thinking of other triggers, and asking what's maintaining that behaviour. And Tim Bergen's 4 questions, so thinking around the function of the behaviour, how it evolved, what perhaps causes it, and how it's developed over time can really help us to really dig deep into understanding why these behaviours may be occurring and whether they're actually suitable for that situation, if they're helping that animal, or if that animal is basically telling you their welfare is being compromised. So, just to finish off, there is like so much out there in terms of behavioural resource, and I know we all get a bit woo about where to go when you're online, and it can be a bit, you've got just some kind of random person spouting away, and it's a bit hard to know who to trust sometimes, but there are so many resources out there. These are just a few. There should be, oh no, there wasn't. So yeah, one thing we sort of would be really useful to know, I mean, I've put a few up here now, but if any of you have got resources that you use with sort of yourselves or for your clients, it'd be really, really useful for us to know, so we that know who that we can direct people to for different species, because obviously I've got quite an equine sort of spin on where I'm looking. We sadly only have one cow site, so if anybody has got any ideas of really useful behaviour sources that are accessible and easy to share, that would be awesome. Oh no, look, we've handily got it as a Slido. I didn't realise. Awesome. I don't know what I do now. Oh, now it's gone completely. Now I see, this is why I shouldn't be left alone with tools. Make it come back, somebody. Okay, I think I've completely screwed it up now, sorry. So hopefully that just comes up as like an open question and you can just bung your answers in there. But yeah, thank you.
So, thank you very much to Joe, Carrie, Nikki, and Marion as well. Those are the formal talks. We're now going to move to an open discussion section. We've got two people with roving microphones who are going to wander around. So just put your hand up and one of the microphones will come to you. We also have some questions coming through on Slido. We might need some help from the people up there to get them to come through. And you can just add your questions onto Slido. There was, while we're waiting for that, there was a question that came in earlier, and it said that in humans it's increasingly recognized that we need positive and some negative stimuli so that we can truly embrace life and understand happiness. Does the same apply to animals? In other words, almost suggesting that the negatives are good in an odd way, perverse way for animals, so they can possibly enjoy life better. I wasn't sure if somebody wanted to take that thorny question.
Lovely. So I think for me, there's two key aspects that comes into negative or aversive experiences for animals in particular. Largely speaking with humans, and this is, I guess, maybe a perspective that we've got from a kind of privileged society aspect, but we can appreciate the positives as long as we've been able to cope with the aversives, and often that coping comes from a place of having some choice and some control, which I think is a really important thing to acknowledge. Aversives without any ability to get away from them is unlikely to be a positive welfare experience. And secondly, I think it's, again, being in an emotional situation to start with and a physical health situation to start with where you can cope with that aversive. So again, it's making sure that we're not inducing aversives to the point where it's damaging to physical or emotional health, where there's repercussions that imply there's no recovery from that. And an element of that is going to be choice and control from my perspective.
Did anyone else want to chip in? No? It would actually be really good. This is a discussion forum. So as we go along and the members of the panel give their views, just feel free to take a microphone and chip in with your own views as well. Because I think the panel are probably, well, Nikki even said it, on a constant learning journey as well. So it is constantly, we're changing our views, we're updating, and then hopefully doing the best we can with our most recent beliefs. The two microphones, if anyone wants to talk, yeah? Just so we have, yeah. And while we're just waiting for the first person, to get their microphone, there's a question here about exotic pets. I think somebody mentioned about bearded dragons, and there's one of them in an advertisement on TV, so there's probably going to be a glut in bearded dragons over the next year or two. How can we educate the public on behaviour in exotic pets where they can communicate with us less readily than for other domesticated animals, or presumably we're talking about mammalian domesticated animals. So exotic pets, Joe?
Yeah, so I think the first point to make is that we're pretty rubbish at like mammals to start off with, let alone any other species. And I like building things like hamsters, guinea pigs, rabbits are often very misunderstood in terms of their behaviour. But I think there's so much more that we could do. And I think a lot of it comes around to the language we're using when we're having these animals as pets with pet owners. And certainly hamsters, guinea pigs, rabbits, children's pets. So people think it's really easy to look after them and to understand them because obviously they're for children. Sort of reptiles, there is, I guess, a bit more of that distance, and people often after sort of have different expectations around those animals as well, and I think that's important to recognise. In terms of educating, I think there's a lot more that we can do in terms of sort of the language we're using, how we are actually, it needs to be industry-wide. I don't think it's something your vet can just, by the way, but it's knowing where to signpost people, knowing, with vets knowing as well what's normal, what's not normal, what they need to look out for, what those requirements are, and really having those conversations with the owners is fundamental, really. Sorry,
Okay.
Lost my thought.
Gary, are you
There
gonna...
was, I was just trying to look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. Someone else in the room might know. And there was a talk a couple of years ago at BVBA about an exotic pet quiz that we can encourage people to do before taking on specific exotic pets. If anyone has that in the front of their brain, I'd be really grateful because it's not in the front of mine. But I do think there's more of awareness of our lack of knowledge in exotics, like you were saying, Joe, whereas with mammals we kind of have this assumption that, well, dogs are man's best friend, clearly we can look after them without sort of needing to educate ourselves in the same way. So I guess with that acknowledgement with exotics, at least there is a little bit of a sort of help out there already. But yeah, if anyone knows what that is, that would be great.
Is it E-Mode?
Might be.
I think. Yeah, E-Mode Pet Score. So basically it's a website, and you put the animal you're particularly interested in taking on as a pet, and it gives you a score on how easy they are to look after and the particular challenges and what they really need for them, the environment, and to how to meet their welfare needs across the 5 domains. So, yeah, we can share it on some form of sharing email-ness afterwards. But, yeah, it's just EMODE and petscore.com.
Yep, excellent. Did we have somebody on a roving mic over here? Yeah.
Hiya, yeah, I'm Izzy Fairs from the Royal Vet College. Carrie, I think you said at the start of your talk that when you were at vet school you struggled to get any sort of behaviour learning. I'm involved a lot with our preclinical students, just teaching sort of basic handling, and to be honest, we struggled to get enough of that. So it's sort of another thing to add in behaviour, as important as it is. I suppose the question is, it's putting a lot of maybe extra pressure on our vet students to add something else into what's already a very busy curriculum. So do you think there's something to be said for maybe having more paraprofessionals, you know, people who have done clinical animal behaviour masters who aren't necessarily vets, but actually having them in practice? Do you think it would be a worthwhile, you know, occupation to have someone actually in the practice with you to take the burden off vets and vet?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point. We certainly don't have enough veterinary professionals, in my view, at the moment to be able to fulfil all of those teaching needs. And I do think there's absolutely brilliantly qualified non-vets that can look at animal behaviour, observable behaviour, and the interpretation of that. I do definitely think when you get into the clinical years of vet school, there's a real importance on understanding the interplay between the physical health and the emotional health, and I do think that is a veterinary role, but absolutely from a handling point of view and a body language point of view, there's a huge resource untapped at the moment from a non-veterinary perspective. Really, really good point.
I think just adding on that, behaviour is it's the focus of people's degrees, masters, PhDs, and I think there seems to be this certain feeling that vets are expected to know all of that as well, and there's you can't be expected to know everything about every single species, and there's places you can go to for advice. So I would sort of also recommend not just trying to blag it, but actually refer people on to a specialist in that particular area if you're not sure in any way at all, because certainly from people that I've spoken to within the equine realm, they felt their vet was uncertain, and they sort of lost their confidence a bit in what they were doing. And I think just recognising that there's places for both owners and vets to go for further advice is really important.
Yep, very good. And as we go along, remember, if any of you have kind of follow back information on the exotic pets or paraprofessionals, do feel free to take a microphone as well. It doesn't have to be just a brand new question. We had somebody over here. Yes.
It's on exotic pets. I wonder if anyone thinks the veterinary profession should be taking quite an active and strong stance against exotic pets in general, given that they're very often in like wildly inappropriate environments, and as we've ascertained, quite hard to read, some of them. Yeah, I wonder if you think that that should be a more active, kind of very definitely not a thing that we should be promoting. And it, obviously, every pet shop I've ever been in is hideous, and it promotes the illegal wildlife trade and that sort of thing.
Actually, apart from the panel, there's some hands gone up here. Does somebody from the audience just want to give a reply on that? Because it's interesting to get a discussion going. There's two hands here.
So I'm an exotic vet. I see lots of exotic animals. I think we need to take ourselves out of the perception of 20 years ago. I think a lot of exotic owners are putting a lot of work into their setups. I often think that's a bit of an assumption that's not always agreed with by experience. So I get where you're coming from, but lots of exotic animals are much easier to care for, with much more regards for their welfare than many conventional pets, dogs and cats. Let's think of stick insects. Is it okay, by your own statement, we should not keep stick insects because they're exotic? I think we need to be thinking a bit more cognizantly about what welfare is. And I guess with respect to animal behaviour, I often find that my exotic clients are more respectful of behaviour because they're not making assumptions, which we'll often see with cats and dogs. So it doesn't always translate that way.
Okay, faster. And just down, excuse me, a microphone just at the front. Just because I could see the hand go up and then you can go back.
Yeah, thanks. Justine Shotton, past president of BVA and current head vet for wildlife and exotics at RSPCA. So BVA did publish a policy position statement on non-traditional companion animals, which covers certain aspects of this, and definitely it's something that we're looking at RSPCA in terms of positive lists, so whether it's appropriate to have a small handful of species that can be kept well, that because we can meet their welfare needs in captivity. Some European countries have gone down this route. We're not sure yet whether it's going to be appropriate or not. I think, you know, there's so many different species, it's very hard to say for sure if we can meet their welfare needs. Often we don't understand them completely, even with expert owners. So it's hard when you're comparing exotics to dogs, cats, rabbits. You know, there's potentially thousands of different species. And one point on the website as well, there's a website, well, it's in development still, but hopefully there'll be tests on the pet know-how website for exotic pets as well, and whether it's appropriate. And that's something that the Companion Animal Sector Council are working on as well. Thanks.
Okay, superb. Sometimes you don't need the panel. The audience can do it. Just while we're waiting for that microphone to be passed on, there's a one here. Problem behaviour. Is this a loaded word? Passing judgment when it's just an animal showing a behaviour that's appropriate in view of the context that it's in. So the actual language itself, problem behaviour, problematic behaviour, is that in itself an issue? Mariam?
I'm sure it is a loaded word. I mean, the cat is scratching your furniture and it's a problem for you, but it's just doing a natural behaviour. So that's absolutely right. It's a clash of what they want and what you want.
Goes along the same lines as your spicy. Just any kind of language, you really do have to take into account what the context is, because, as has been stated, yes, it might be a problem to you, but it's not a problem to the animal. It's actually trying to shout at you, and you have to listen with your eyes in order to understand the animal that's in front of you.
Would people agree with that? Yeah? Yeah.
Just a slight
Gary?
contrary view
Yeah.
to that, if you don't mind. I completely agree. Depending on the context in which that word is used, it can be a loaded word. But also, when we're thinking clinically about behavioural medicine, actually we're just creating problem lists in the same way that we would with physical health conditions. So, if we do need to start with a list of problems, and with the referral behavioural medicine work that I do, we start with a caregiver-defined list of problem behaviours. We go out, we assess the case, and quite often have a separate list of problem behaviours that we take from the animal's perspective, and then we have to marry up and try and work out how to solve both of those problems to get a good outcome overall. But yeah, I think it depends on the context in which the word is used, but when we use it clinically, actually, we are just dealing with a problem list, so there is some relevance to it as well.
Very interesting. I guess as well we call them behaviour referrals, but all through your talks you were talking that it's really the emotion we're interested in rather than the behaviour, so we probably shouldn't even have behaviour referrals, should be emotion referrals maybe. However, we're not going to change the world. There was somebody over here, yes?
Hello, Nikki Trevorrow from Cats Protection. Just because I'm working from cats, I can talk about other species too. So I just wanted to make a quick comment about the exotics we were chatting about. I just wanted to say, I wonder if you're seeing the ones that are referred are the lucky ones that get to see you as a exotics vet in practice. And perhaps what I wanted to raise is the wider industry, and that all the ones that aren't getting it to the vets. And we went to a fantastic talk by Clifford Warwick recently with the APBC conference. So these are from him, not from me. But just saying there's like 90% of captive reptiles showing stress-related behaviours, 70% of general mortality in 6 weeks as an industry standard across pet suppliers. Marine fish, 98% capture and mortality using cyanide and explosives. 61% of human diseases have potential zoonotic origin. So there's really there's so much more around it that the public are completely and utterly unaware of. So I just think it's a wider issue rather than the pet in front of us. It's everything else sat behind it as an industry. Thank you.
Very good. I think exotics is obviously quite an interesting topic. There'll probably be a suggestion for big themes for next year's conference, so maybe that's one suggesting itself. Did we have a second roving mic? Same one again? Yeah.
Hello, I just wanted to ask the panel what they see the future as, because there's obviously a lot more people now monitoring their pets remotely, using that to observe the pets when they're out at work, and a real increase in pet ownership during COVID. And we've seen examples shown today, like the dog there that was obviously anxious but wagging its tail, and misinterpretation by the veterinary profession. So do you think that artificial intelligence will be a useful tool for you as animal behaviourists to unlock this awareness of what is a behavioural issue and what is not, more than the professional eye? Thanks.
Ooh, wonderful futuristic question. Who wants to take that? Any futuristic panelists?
I'm totally not techie or futuristic, but I think it can be really valuable, and just having that sort of more objective insight can actually be really useful, and having that opportunity to get people to think about it in a different way than just what you're seeing with your own eyes when you're watching your animal in person. Sorry, Marianne was going to go there, and I butted in.
I think there's a great future. I think one of the problems at the moment is we don't have the database that we need. I mean, in order to get good data, you've got to have a good, consistent database with lots of different behaviours and lots of different outcomes. And honestly, animal behaviour people are not that well organised. And I mean, if we had this library, that would. I think you're absolutely right. But I think the stumbling block is just having the data.
So you think it could also be almost be some kind of like citizen science project if people are basically filming their pets with all these remote cams, and we could collect all that footage somewhere and do something with it? Because
yes, I mean, that would begin to build it up very much so. Yeah.
And I think not only video footage, but things like movement trackers and that sort of thing. I've got a real interest in sleep at the moment, and we're trying to work out determining the difference between rest and sleep is going to be a bit, but there's so much technology that we could utilise in that sort of stuff. Definitely opportunities there.
Okay, very good. Just while we're waiting for the mic, there's one on technology, whatever this is. Should behaviour be assessed and considered as being just as important as physical health in the consulting room?
I mean, I'm massively biased, but yes.
Yeah? I would have been surprised if it was a different answer. Anyone think that it isn't as important?
I think you need both.
Yeah, need both.
I think you can't do with, if you do one without the other, you're in trouble.
Okay.
If you give the animal exactly what it wants, then you will end up in health problems. If you only look at the health, you've missed out a very important part of its welfare.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I guess it comes up, we had a bit of a discussion early doors about what do we actually mean by behaviour, but I mean, if a dog comes in limping, that is an observable behaviour that's going to be directly related to its physical health. So yeah, whether we're talking emotion/behaviour or whatever, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so they're kind of the same thing. Microphone was here.
Hi, yeah, Ed Bailey from Vet Sustain. I just wondered, just reflecting on the comment about AI and also the lack of space in the veterinary curriculum, and linking earlier perhaps as well to the desire for tools to support decision-making around euthanasia. It feels like as vets maybe we feel under pressure that we haven't got the headspace to acquire new skills. And you guys obviously have extremely fulfilling careers in which you have honed your observation skills and your communication skills. And it feels like maybe an abdication of responsibility to look for AI or paraprofessionals or tools as solutions to our problems rather than trying to grow as professionals and developing our observation and communication skills.
But isn't that then when every single person in the room should be looking and observing, regardless of how geeky they are? Yes, behaviour is part of everyday veterinary medicine, so everybody should learn, and it's really not that difficult. It's, at the end of the day, the dog's got a broken leg, but its broken leg, it can also give it other behaviours that we need to discuss and deal with, not just the broken leg. It's like human mental health, isn't it? You can't just ignore it. You have to think about that aspect as well.
Okay, very good. Microphone.
I was just going to say, as a vet student, I definitely agree. I think animal behaviour should be something that is a constant theme throughout of the degree. And I think it might be a mistake to compare it to the kind of, block syllabus style thing we have for our clinical teaching. I think, we do it certainly at the University of Bristol with communication skills. We recognise that that is integral to day-to-day work. And so that is a constant stream throughout our degree. I think behaviour could be taught in a very similar way. And I think it's something that is integral to clinical reasoning. It crops up in pretty much every aspect of our jobs. So I think there is something to be said for the way it could be taught without placing too much strain on vet students. And thank you very much to those of you concerned about that. It's a lot of work.
Okay. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Just while we're waiting the microphone to come back, slightly provocative question. What more can be done to educate owners? Should all pet owners take a form of mandatory training on behaviour before they are allowed to acquire a pet? Anyone want to?
In an ideal world, yeah. It's not going to happen though, but it would be fantastic if we could. But again, that's where the veterinary profession as a whole and all the animal caregivers can help to educate. I mean, I can sit here and educate you guys, and I'm probably teaching you to suck eggs then, aren't you? But at the end of the day, I can go to somebody at my vet practice who is got a prong collar on their dog and they don't know any different because that's what they've been taught by their neighbour or the trainer down the road. So we have to use our knowledge to say to them, well, have you thought about other ways? Have you thought about how the animal's thinking? So it's difficult, but I think it's something that we should all be doing.
Okay, is there one more in the microphone? Yes. Yep.
It's such a quick one, slightly off piece as well, but it feels normal to me, but it's something I've picked up on today. Nikki, you mentioned language. I wonder if you think referring to animals as it might have knock-on wider effects on how we perceive those animals and treat them. I'm so used to now saying they or them or he or she if I can.
Throw it back to yourself. How would you like it if your pet was called an it? How would, if you, as a mother of a human being, I wouldn't like both my sons to be called its, So I know it's not anthropomorphizing here, but if we relate it but to animals, then it's still a sentient being. It's still something that has feelings, that has emotions. So because of that, we should then accept it as an actual being and be respectful not only to the animal, but also to the caregiver that comes along with it, and actually call it something as a he or a she by its name, and instead of actually just going, nah, just forget about it, it's just not important to me. So I really do have to say to people, be aware of your language about what you're saying to your caregivers.
Just as a bit of a question to the room, do many people come across animals being itted? Like, I think that's quite unusual in, certainly in referral work, but fair enough. Okay, cool. Good. A few, handful.
Some, but not too many. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions and your interaction. Yeah, go for it, really quick.
I've got it. Hi, I'm Ali. I'm an RVN, 30 years, so yeah, still in it. Just going back to education, sort of at many of the practices that I've worked at, which has been quite a few, sort of in East Anglia and around that area, we've had quite a good relationship with the schools in the area, and kids in particular love nothing better than an RVN or a vet nurse or a vet going in, having a chat about what they do day to day, taking clothes in, but also those children are the ones, how I look at it, they're the ones that are going to grow up to be sensible pet owners, if that makes sense. So they're the ones that I like to think that when I've got in, I'm hopefully educating them to look after their dog properly or their cat, or not get something that, you know, rabbits are rubbish pets for children, you know, go for something else. So just maybe, you know, vets, veterinary nurses as a whole, we could look at trying to build that relationship on a local level with the schools and colleges in our area. Sorry.
And I think that's something that's changed again over the years, because when I used to do them school visits years ago, it was showing them, letting them bandage or letting them gown up and stuff like that. Whereas now, if I was to go into a school, the first thing I would teach them would be body language and how they, as I've discussed, that use their own language to an animal. That's more important than how to bandage a paw, because at the end of the day, do you really want the general public to bandage paws? No, because you know how much damage that can do. What is more interesting to a child, regardless of whether they're going to come into the profession or not, because how many children go up to a dog without asking for permission, whether they can actually touch the dog? We should be teaching that. That is more important than bandaging a dog's paw.
Really good. Excellent question. Okay, so sadly we have come to the end of the time for the questions here. So let's wrap up the session by reconsidering the question we had at the start. Let's see if you have changed your minds. Remember Peter Sandow's love in which you all depends upon your answers. Are you still a divided audience? So do you think you can tell when an animal is happy? Yes, no, or maybe? It looks as though Peter is still a happy man. So 54% maybes. Okay, and that stopped moving now. Okay, that's interesting. So really that's saying, as a veterinary profession, vets and vet nurses, the majority of us are saying we probably don't know if an animal is happy. Think that's a concern? Yeah, a couple of 100 years after the first vet schools were founded, and we don't know if an animal is happy. Yeah, challenging times, eh? And then we're just going to finish with trying to do a word cloud. I'm hoping this thing will work. So the idea here is to try and gather information on how we can best help you all to continue learning about this topic. So the request is that you submit some answers to the following word cloud that should be popping up on Slido now. Ideally aim for maybe one word or very short answers. And the question is, what kind of further information would you like on this topic? So we're looking at the overall area of behaviour. And I think you all know how the worders or the word clouds work. So words that get repeated get bigger and get pushed to the middle. So far a bit like Marion had said, evidence, videos, which I think was Joe's comment, exotics behaviour. I like it says exotics behaviour as opposed to dropping the S. That would be probably a little bit concerning. CPD. And actually, it is those 5, isn't it? Yeah. Has exotic behaviour appeared?
It is that time of the afternoon.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So it kind of is coming out with the kind of main messages, evidence-based, evidence, same thing, video, CPD, and exotic behaviour. Okay, very good. So as we draw this session to a close, we'd like to thank World Horse Welfare for supporting the session. We're now going to finish this kind of overall part with the